Why is it called ASMR?
I don't know, but I wish I had thought of it.
I know.
Listen. Shh.
Is there anything that requires less skill than just eating loudly? Yeah.
You know, yeah, people eating, really? I mean, you and I could have done that. I mean, that could have been could have studied it in college.
I would say there's still time. That may be a pivot that is still in our future.
Can I ask you a question? If you suck at ASMR, if that's it, ASMR, I think that's it. If you suck at it, like, what are you doing wrong there, do you think? You're just too loud, or you're not clicking on the right thing? Like, I don't know.
Not loud enough, maybe.
Well, no, you're supposed to be quiet.
But they're doing things that are inherently quiet, and they're making them loud.
By magnifying the...
Yeah, by clicking on things and like making the... These are not supposed to be like super loud activities. So I don't know. Can you be too loud at that?
I don't know, but it seems to me like these people are freaking brilliant, man. You take a skill set that really isn't a skill set and you turn it into like this Olympic event. You know what I mean? It's like, you know, anyone can do that. You and I can do that.
Yeah.
Right?
You actually did do a pretty good job ruffling that bag just now. So
not bad. Not bad.
Maybe it's me who needs to prove himself.
Well, maybe you should. And maybe that's my category, like of ASMR. Yeah. There's no way we're going to make it through this podcast without you having to pee now. Well done. Just keep chugging that water.
Maybe that's the skill of ASMR. You got to be able to hold a lot of liquid. That's your key.
Hey, would you ever
and that
consider...
probably would preclude us.
For sure. So we have a heck of a show today. And again, as we start off all of our shows, I want to thank our media partner, Betting News Now, because this show gets pushed out at 27,000 people inside of the industry every single week, twice a week, Mike. On Friday in its own email, and then again on Monday. So we're grateful to them for that, and grateful for all of you for choosing to spend some time with us. We have a killer topic today. Mike, why don't you get us into that, and so much to say about it.
Yeah, well, it kind of stemmed from a comment that you made at the end of last week's episode. And for those of you who missed last week's episode, I would highly recommend going back and checking that out, because that's, I think, a really important topic. Episode 6, we talked about the value destruction that is happening as a result of the increased share growth of these, what I call blind retail channels, these retail channels that have no showroom, no salespeople, and no expert guidance, and how that leads inevitably to a race to the bottom, essentially. And because of how big of a channel that's become, it's ultimately undermining consumers' perception of value across the entire category. And we got deep into that, and I think there's going to be a lot of insights for people in that episode. I highly recommend checking it out. But towards the end of the episode, you made a comment about, you know, do you remember back, it wasn't that long ago when retailers, brick and mortar retailers, were like, you wouldn't catch me dead carrying one of these D2C brands on my floor. And there was also a standoff with the brands that they already did carry. Don't you dare begin to sell direct, and I will drop you, and all these things. And I thought that was just an interesting topic, because I think everyone on an intuitive level knows things have changed quite a bit since then. But that was only like 10 years ago, let's say, and maybe less for some retailers, that was the absolute state of affairs in the industry. And I was saying as early as 2016 or so, when I was speaking about like what's happening with this online revolution, it was very evident to me a few things. One, that these brands that were emerging in the D2C channel were eventually going to want to sell through brick and mortar. Of course they will, because eventually they will saturate the group of people who are willing to buy sight unseen, and they will need, in order to continue their growth trajectories, they will need to expand into that segment of consumers who are still a large segment of consumers who do want to try their product before they buy it and prefer to buy from a brick and mortar store. But two, I also was encouraging brands who did not originate as DTC and did not sell direct. I was encouraging them to strongly consider doing so. Not that it's right for every brand, but for a lot of brands, and it was almost no brands that were considering it at the time, I was urging them to strongly consider doing it because I believe that there were a lot of benefits not only for them, but for their dealers. And I was encouraging dealers to show grace to those manufacturers for exploring that and ultimately even pursuing that in many cases. So that was what I was describing to people. And
so you're to blame, essentially, is what I picked up from the last 30 seconds. But I want to hear your take there. But I also, at some point, I think it's interesting to talk about how we got there, because if you remember, and maybe we can rewind after you kind of finish setting the table, because the evolution of this has been really interesting. And now we are where we are. It's come a long way in a short period of time. Just a couple things to get us straight. You have Tuft Needle. They launched in 2012, Dehi and John Thomas Marino. Casper came in with Philip Krim around 2014. Bed-in-a-Box, Mike, oddly enough, the OG, or they claim to be the OG, around 2006.
That's right.
And then, and then there was a lot of adoption early in the club scene with Michael Fuchs and some of what they were doing. But anyway, we could talk about some of that later, but it's come a long way, is my point, right? From when it first launched, people wondering, is it ever going to work? And I'm really wanting you to go ahead and get us into that, where, like, what's on your mind in terms of where we sit, essentially.
Yeah, well, I think maybe it does make sense to sort of take it from where we were in 2016 and what I was seeing at that time.
Yeah.
Because that kind of explains how we got to where we are today. I saw what they were doing with advertising, and there was two key things. Number one is when you sell your product direct, you obviously make a higher margin. But the higher margin allows you to invest more in advertising. And that's what these brands were doing. They were investing as a percentage of their sales. And in some cases, it was an unsustainable percentage. Casper was at one point spending maybe 30%, I think, of their top line on advertising. And it was not being spent effectively enough to be sustainable. And that ultimately started to unravel for them. But a lot of people were pointing at Nectar, who had come into the scene about 2 years after Casper, and looking at their spend, which was incredibly aggressive. They were spending at one point probably around the same percentage, 30%. And maybe they still are, for all I know, but they were spending about $300 million a year in advertising. And I think their top line was only $900 million or something like that. But they were spending it incredibly effectively. And they were able to maintain the profitability because obviously they have very high gross margins when they're selling direct. And really their main cost was just customer acquisition. And if they're able to spend those dollars in a smart way, and that's a topic for a whole nother day about what does it mean to spend your dollars in a smart way, because obviously you could do a lot of different things with 30% ad budget. But they were focusing on lower funnel in a way that really set the blueprint for the most successful D2C brands of today. And so that showed that you can invest a ton in brand building. And actually, brand building is kind of the wrong term because they were really focused on that lower funnel. And it was more just customer acquisition. But what was happening is...
But wait. So I don't know about that. I think there was a lot of lower funnel stuff, but I remember Casper and really Tuft Needle. Remember, Tuft Needle was before any of them, honestly, in 2012. And they had the whole thing of retailers are greedy. And the point of contention I would like to make is I think that for some of these D2C brands, they weren't thinking brick and mortar initially, because if they were, then their strategy would have been different. Do you remember when Casper and later when Nectar went to the brick and mortar market? They had a hard time because neither one of these companies were product companies. They were marketing companies. And their products were not competitive when they first launched into brick and mortar, which is the reason I'm saying I don't know that they were really mapping out the brick and mortar extension of what they did from the beginning, because I think they really stumbled. Nectar, for sure. I think Casper did too, because the products weren't that great when they first went to brick and mortar.
I'm not saying that they knew that they wanted to be in brick and mortar eventually.
Okay.
I'm saying that I knew that they would eventually want to be brick and mortar.
Okay, that's fair.
Because
I
knew that they would run out. I knew what percentage of people were willing to buy a mattress sight unseen. I knew that from Good Bed data.
Sure.
So I knew that there was a finite group of people, and I knew that they would eventually hit a limit with their growth. And I knew that they were backed by, in many cases, venture capitalists or what have you. And those people had expectations of growth that would not be able to be sustained once they hit this limit if they did not expand into brick and mortar. So I knew that. But probably before some of them knew that. But either way, like, they had to take the approach they did in the early days by positioning themselves as the enemy of brick and mortar, because they were capitalizing on the terrible reputation that mattress retailers had kind of earned for themselves.
Yeah.
And they were basically saying, hey, do you not like that used car sleazy experience that mattress stores are famous for?
Right.
Well, we're the opposite of that. It was just an easy ploy.
Yeah. Do you remember the whole Casper thing? Correct me if I'm wrong. My recollection of it was overall strategy, Tuft Needle, super smart, Amazon, tons of reviews, consumer validation, which was important early on because Bed in the Box hadn't really been vetted by consumers. So all the reviews from Amazon, freaking brilliant that they did it that way. Very hard to make money. And again, go back and listen to the last show. There's a lot of good conversation around Amazon and should you be on it or not. But Casper enters the scene. Their whole vibe was one bed for everyone. You remember that? There's one bed for everyone. And so they just talked about that as their entry point. But brand building. And then the thing that I give Casper credit for is that they were really smart. Man, they were doing really cool stuff in New York subways and on bikes and delivery. And so I think they were brand building. And then Nectar came in. But hang on. And then Nectar was kind of after the whole, remember the Dollar Shave Club? Like the real cheeky video that they, like, Nectar was kind of there with Purple. And matter of fact, I think Nectar might have even used Purple's ad agency. So they were kind of quirky and fun. And so I still feel like they were all trying to create something there too, don't you?
Okay, so we got to separate out, because when I was talking about the emphasis on lower funnel, I was talking specifically about Nectar.
Okay.
Every one of these brands took a different path. Okay.
Yes.
Casper's path was not about lower funnel. In fact, that was kind of their undoing in that time frame. Is that basically their path was really about earned media. They were the darling of when everybody wanted to write a story about buying a mattress in a box, buying a mattress online. They wanted to write it about Casper, and they got so much press. The mattress industry has never, before or since, gotten that much press. Period.
Great point. Yep.
Ever. And Casper was in every one of those stories. And as a result, I think, of getting all that free attention, they never really had to develop the efficient marketing muscle. So when they had the money to then spend on marketing, I don't think they spent it very well. And that was a function of their undoing ultimately. And they were spending it on things like Subway ad, and that was cute and you remember it, but it didn't move the needle enough for them to get a return on that ad spend. So those were the early days where people were figuring out how they should be spending that money. And that's when Nectar came in and really showed everybody how to do it. It was like, hey, you don't need Subway ads. In fact, you don't even need unaided brand awareness at all. All you need is that people who are shopping for a mattress right now, they should feel like Nectar is the biggest brand in the world. Everybody else, man on the street, could never have heard of Nectar. And that's completely fine, because we don't care until you start shopping for a mattress. And then we will hound you relentlessly until you finally submit to buying a Nectar. That's effectively what they did.
Dude, you're so right. And they were digital marketing assassins. Like they had the website review guys. Everyone's talking about them.
Oh, they came in with higher affiliate. They said, we will pay you double, triple what other people are paying you. That's what they told all the affiliates.
Yeah, the affiliates were all over them. Yes.
And then what did the affiliates do? Of course, they're like, well, in that case, you are now the best mattress for everybody.
Side sleeper, back sleeper.
Yeah, doesn't matter.
They won every category.
You are the universal best mattress in our quote unquote opinion.
Right.
And so they went in and they bought that whole channel, And they were super aggressive with retargeting and things like that were relatively unexploited opportunities at that point in time. And they actually got a return on that ad spend. That was my point. Their foray into brand building came later. They were already spending hundreds of millions of dollars by the time they started that cheeky campaign that you're referencing. That was probably 2018, 19. Purple's path was very different than either of those, though, because Purple was like the Dollar Shave Club of our category. Their path was they struck it big with a few viral videos, which did kind of have a scattershot effect in terms of they're hitting people who are not necessarily in market, but they were so viral and they reached so many people that they generated enough interest. So it was a little bit more like Casper in the sense of they didn't have to pay for all those impressions. And then eventually that translated into a lot of sales. Even though obviously they tried to be smart about that viral video. That wasn't an accident, but nonetheless, like with Casper, that eventually dies out. The viralness of the Purple videos died out, and they ultimately had to find a more effective, more sustainable approach to their DTC marketing. And that's when they brought Joe Megabo in. And anyway, so that was Purple's path. Every one of these brands took a different path. Tuft Needle's path was they were the first one on Amazon. And they were all about getting a ton of great reviews on Amazon. They were exploiting the fact that what we talked about last week, cheap mattresses on Amazon will always get the best reviews. They have the easiest graders. They were a cheap mattress on Amazon, so it was easier for them to rack up tons of reviews and a great star rating. And then they were able to exploit that by saying, hey, look at us. We're the top rated brand on Amazon.
Yeah.
So that was their path.
Do you remember who superseded it all, though, Mike? Was Michael Fuchs, Sleep Innovations. And he had bed-in-the-box that went into Sam's Club and it went into Costco. And I remember it very clearly because I was the VP of National Accounts for Serta dealing with Sam's Club. And they had these mattresses in a box and no one even knew what they were. And then if you remember, everyone in the industry was like, oh, it's never going to work. I was with Leggett. I did $80,000 worth of consumer research around bed-in-the-box because we wanted to understand, like, how big of a threat is this? These mattresses in a box. And the way I had it set up was I had IDIs, in-depth interviews, and independent consumers one at a time. They would come in and I'd have 45 minutes with them. And I had a mattress and I had them lay on the mattress. And this was at the time when Tempur-Pedic was just crushing it. And it felt like Tempur-Pedic because it was memory foam. So that was in the context in their head. And they lay on the bed. I said, well, what do you think of that? And they go, oh my God, it feels like amazing, blah, blah, blah. And then I go, well, what would you pay for that? What do you think that costs? They would say $1,500, $2,000. Again, frame of reference being Tempur-Pedic in their mind. So then I would spin them around and there was a sheet over a box, right? And I pulled the sheet off the box and I go, there's a box. The branding, all the copy, all on the box. I didn't hide anything. And I said, what do you think goes in there? And they read it and they go, well, it's a mattress. I go, yeah, it's a mattress. I go, well, what kind of bed do you think that is? They said, I don't know, probably some cheap thing, blah, blah, blah. And I go, would that be a master bedroom bed? No, no, no. I said, would it feel good? No, no, no. I said, would you believe that that bed you just laid on came out of that box, right? No, but consumers could not even fathom the idea that you could roll up a mattress, stick it in that box, and then it would feel that. Like, that was the beginning. And right then and there, I knew we were in such big trouble.
Yeah.
As it relates to that being validated concept.
So the box, roll packing, compression, all that stuff, that's part of the innovation because it obviously allowed for UPSing and FedExing, which brought delivery costs down to under $100 where they had been like white glove delivery, $250, $300. So that definitely changed the economics a little bit. The D2C brands, I think, are the ones that really changed the perception of quality as it relates to a compressed roll packed mattress.
Agreed.
Like, I don't think it was the Costco products that made people think, oh, these are high quality. I think it was when they were seeing ads for Casper or they're reading the, New York Times talking about Casper like that. That's when they started to go, oh, maybe roll packing is not equated to low quality.
Well, yeah, and I guess I should have tied that off a little bit better. My point was that because of that time in clubs and consumers seeing that pretty consistently, it probably did some job, don't know how much, of validating the fact that a mattress could be in a box and then you could take it home and sleep on it, right? So then Casper, Tuft Needle, all these guys built built big programs on top of that. But I feel like it was an early validation for the concept of a roll pack bed.
Yeah. But we're getting a little off track because what we were trying to talk about was the D2C brands coming into stores.
Yeah, but it's all part of the story. It's all part of the story.
But yeah, so we're trying to explore why they ended up in retail stores and what value that brought. And so the thing is that when you have higher margins and you can spend more in your brand, you're generating a bunch of demand from active shoppers. And there is a limit to what portion of those people will ultimately transact online without ever seeing your product and feeling it. And guess what? None of these brands that we've mentioned so far were the first people to discover this. You know who the first mattress brand was to discover this? I'll give you a hint. It rhymes with Tempur-Pedic.
Oh, right. Very true. With their long form commercials.
They set this whole playbook. Yeah, they generated a ton of demand. In their case, it was from late night infomercials, and they generated curiosity. People were interested in this product, but again, there was a limit to how many people were going to call that phone number and buy the mattress sight unseen. And so they realized we got to get this out into places. So the first place they went was to malls, Hammacher Schlemmer, Sharper Image, or whatever. And then they realized we still have tons of demand that we're generating. It's just sort of spilling all over the sides of the boat because we can't satisfy these people with a phone transaction. And so they started going into stores. And obviously anybody who was one of those first Tempur-Pedic dealers would tell you that people are coming in wanting Tempur-Pedic. So it's kind of funny how that probably was happening 10 plus years, but not crazy amounts of time before this whole D2C revolution. And yet people seem to have completely forgotten it by the time we got to like these bed-in-a-box guys, where I was looking at it as more of an outsider. I was going, this is going to follow the exact same path.
Oh, yeah.
These retailers are going to appreciate the traffic that these guys can bring in. And the manufacturers are going to value the fact that now they can convert people that otherwise were just wasted. We've spent money getting these guys excited, jazzed up about our product, and yet they're never going to transact online. So here we go. Now we have a win-win for everybody. Stick around. We'll be right back. Hey, Mark, we've got a new sponsor, Imagine.io, and I don't know much about them. I've not worked with them, but I know you have. Can you give me the 10,000 foot view on what it is they do?
Yeah. So forget about hiring a photo studio anymore, Mike, and shipping beds there and getting a photographer and a set designer. Like those days are over.
That's very expensive.
Oh,
Yeah.
It's very expensive. And then you're shipping product in and then you got to ship it back and stuff gets damaged and whatnot. And so this is just a big fat red easy button for you. If you care about how your images look, you can use their platform. It's all computer generated. And you can build your bed, drop it into one of thousands of room settings. And if you don't like one of the room settings they have, you build your own, Mike. And so it's very customizable.
Wow. So all those images on Schiffman's website are all created through this platform? They're created digitally with no photography?
Yes, that's exactly right. And we love it that way
Wow.
because if I want to take different camera angles, Mike, if I want to get one from top down or a 3/4 view or one like right at the foot of the bed and even a slow movement, you can do some motion. It's amazing. And if I don't like a lamp or a painting or, the way it's lit, if I want the sun coming in from a different source, we can do that. And you can manipulate all of those things inside of the Imagine.io platform. So if you're looking to really level up your game as it relates to images, go check them out and tell them the Wake Up Call podcast sent you. Imagine.io.
And now back to the show. And so that was one thing. And the other thing is that advertising directly, anyone who has made this shift can tell you, and probably you have some experience with this through what you do in your e-commerce stuff, but you learn so much about your marketing message, about what resonates with the consumer when you are getting visibility into the entire cycle. When you get the conversion data, when you sell through a retailer, there's a telephone game, right? You train this RSAs. This is what you should say. RSAs are having now conversations that you're not part of. You don't really know what the consumer is saying, what the pushback is. Did they even give the message the right way? It all comes back to you through some telephone game. And you're like, I don't know. Was it the product? Was it the story? You don't know. And even if you figure it out, it takes years to figure that out, compiled across all these different retailers and trying to aggregate all that feedback in a sensible way. When you're marketing the product yourself, and you see the conversions and you see exactly how people move through your funnel, you find out fast what resonates and you make changes. You can be so much more agile and nimble, and ultimately it results in a better product and a better message. And by the way, I'm not trying to say that the D2C brands had better products, but I'm just saying they refined their product as needed in a more nimble way than the traditional brands were doing because they were getting that feedback loop from selling direct.
God, that's so true, Mike. And just to affirm two things you said, set a bit differently, the D2C brands own the consumer relationship, right? If you're a manufacturer selling into brick and mortar, you don't own the relationship. And so even the little things like taking the phone calls of someone upset about something, right? And you're the one taking those reps on the customer service phone calls, the learning there. And then to your point, I know with Perfectly Snug, the work I do there, we're in meetings every week and we review creative and we go, is it male or female talent? Is it humor? Is it emotion? What emotion is it? How long is the spot? What is the hook in the first 10 seconds? Like we're analyzing that data, but manufacturers who aren't D2C and really in it that way, they're never going to have that information. So it really does limit you in terms of what you're able to do in terms of refining your messages or refining your product. So yeah, I think that's a great point. Yeah.
Yes. So those are the two things I was seeing in 2016, and obviously those have played out. And, I think what we've seen is manufacturers who were incumbents, were traditional brands, they've gone into D2C, and I think they've benefited from some of these same things. Like I think they have increased their visibility into what works in their messaging. And, the more the D2C advertising they do, the more they learn, obviously. And also, I think that they are generating more interest and traffic for their dealers. Now, the thing some people might say is, well, I don't get as much benefit from a traditional brand's D2C efforts as I do from more of a heritage D2C brand like Nectar or any of the
Helix.
3Z brands or whatever, And I would argue that the difference really has to do with how much it's going to move the needle for you as one store. So you're getting incremental, but it's harder to notice it, is basically the point, because it's a much bigger ocean. So if they invest $100 million in D2C advertising, their ocean is so big that it's hard to see the sea level rise versus if you're a smaller brand and you're putting 100 million into a pond, if you're in that pond, you're going to definitely notice the water level rise there in that pond. So I think that's really the reason why you see it more evidently in the case of these heritage D2C brands, because they have smaller distribution of retailers and they have larger budgets proportionate to that distribution network.
Yeah, and to your question, like why some of the traditional brands aren't as good at that, it's not their origin story, right? They didn't.
By the way, I wasn't even saying that they're not as good. I was saying that even if they're equal
as effective
in terms of their efficacy, their efforts are not going to be as visible to you as a retailer. But I was arguing that you are still benefiting. Like if you think, oh, I'm not benefiting from Beauty Rest selling direct or from Stearns & Foster being sold direct, I would argue, no, you are. You're just not able to see it as well as you can see it when it comes to the D2C brands because they have such smaller footprints of retail distribution relative to those ad budgets.
Yeah. And on the positive side, Mike, of the direct-to-consumer brands, the advertising they put into the market, very good, right? So we're talking about mattresses. And the thing, just a couple observations for me. The thing I like about the direct-to-consumer brands is they build value. So these guys are selling product, right? So they're all set up for conversions. So whatever you're spending, your ROAS, your return on ad spend, you got to make sure you're getting a return on your ad spend. So they're spending a lot of money, but they are brand building with a lot of that spend. But at the same time, they're driving it to its conclusion. They are driving for the conversion, which is the click and then ultimately the sale, right? I think a lot of brick and mortar retailers today don't do that. They're not building value in anything. They might be building value in their store to some degree, but they're not really building value in a lot of product facing type things. Whereas if you're a direct to consumer brand, you are doing that. And then and so I want you to react to that. And then the second observation is when you talk about like the value of a direct to consumer brand, what's the most important thing to a brick and mortar retailer today over everything else, it's traffic to their store.
Yeah. But see, this gets to this new bargain, right? Because
Yeah.
that was not the most important thing that they would expect from a brand 10 years ago. When
No.
they were saying, hey, we don't ever want our current brands to start selling direct, they were not at that point in time expecting that a brand would deliver a bunch of traffic. They were sort of seeing that more as their job. They were expecting the brand would give them some co-op dollars that they could spend on advertising. But ultimately, that it was their job to bring people in. And the brands were going to be helpful insofar as, lending credibility and familiarity to the product assortment. Like, okay, I've heard of these brands, and it's going to be helpful, obviously, once people are in the store, I can sell these products. But they were not looking to the brands to say, hey, I need you to swing my door as the first thing that I'm expecting from you. I don't think. Now, that expectation has very much changed, to your point. Like, I think that that's maybe some cases, the number one thing that a retailer is looking for from a brand. What can you do to bring people to my store?
I'm going to go over the top of your comment there and tell you with certainty, in my opinion. Now, I'm going to make a comment and then defend Casper, and I don't know the other guys as well, but I know the people at Casper, they're brilliant, like their product development crew, Russell, all those guys. They're really focused on their product, and I love it. I don't think that's where they were to start, but now they're really into that.
Yeah.
But those guys, they didn't know product back then. Like, they weren't building the best bed. They were building a bed that had a high margin in a category that was a high margin that gave them room to disrupt it because of the high margin. And to your point, I think that they were all about, like, you didn't have Nectar on your floor even when they first launched there. I thought their aesthetic was bad. I thought the products were mediocre at best. You are not bringing in that product because of the product itself. You are bringing that product in because of its ability to drive traffic to your store. Now, since then, they've kind of all evolved, right? But I don't think early on, I don't think it was at all about product.
Right. No, of course not. But yeah, you're right. Since then, they've all realized, hey, when you take our product from a picture on a website and instead you put it as a physical item on a sales floor next to and right alongside other products on that sales floor, well, the perception is a little different of our product. And they all, I think ultimately, most of the successful D2C brands ended up hiring a bunch of people from the mattress industry who knew product, who knew how to sell at retail, and who could help them basically improve their product in ways that will allow it to succeed not only on a web page, but also on a physical sales floor alongside other brick and mortar products.
You know what, too, Mike? It made it interesting, didn't it? Because if you think back, Tempur-Pedic and really Sleep Number for that matter, they were both long form advertising and told a great story and built tons of value in their product. And both of those had their product platform was new to market. It was Tempur-Pedic material and it was air to adjust comfort.
Mm-hmm.
But when you think about that, and then you think about they really put the legacy brands, I'll say Serta Simmons, Sealy, Stearns & Foster back then, at a disadvantage because those guys were tied into a co-op model, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so if you're paying 10% co-op, then there's not a lot left in the piggy bank to go do your own direct-to-consumer campaign and be the guy driving the traffic again, right?
Yeah. And that's kind of that gets to this new bargain today where I think the D2C brands, they're arguing, hey, we're better at spending these ad dollars than you are. Trust us to keep a few more points in our piggy bank. We will put it to work in a really efficient way that ultimately leads people into your door. And I think they've got more credibility in making that case, whether they're successful or not with any given retailer. They have a lot more credibility making that case than a legacy brand does. And so as a result, they're able to, in many cases, retain that money and invest it themselves. That's part of the bargain. Obviously, the gross margin points, that's part of the bargain. You start to hear retailers are used to at least 50%, and they're trying to get even more, 60, even 70, something like that. With these D2C brands, obviously, they're able to command lower gross margins because of the fact that they're saying, hey, look, this product's basically going to sell itself. And obviously, you're going to get people into your door that you wouldn't have otherwise seen, too. So it's incremental traffic, incremental sales. And so that's, again, part of this new bargain of like, we're striking different arrangements essentially at retail.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great comment. And aren't you better off if you're a brand, Mike, that you are the one that is holding back margin to pay for marketing money, that you know you can deliver an outcome because you're really freaking good at it, like you're a marketing company.
Yeah.
But at the same time, the money you're holding back and the marketing you're doing, you're building value in your intangible asset, right? Because a retailer isn't going to build value in your brand. You can build value in your brand. So I like that business perspective better in the DTC space because they're jacking their brand value up and selling shorter on the floors. Now, the downside early on anyway is some retailers paid retail sales associates based on profitability. So if your profit is lower on a bet on their floor, then you'll probably get a lower commission rate, which means that your marketing has to be really good to overcome that. So they have to get, consumer has to come in predisposed to buy what you're selling. So it's tricky, right?
I think just a couple of things to unpack there. One is that I think that the lower gross margins have probably more to do, I think, with the price it takes to be competitive in an arena that goes outside of the four walls of your store. When you're in the online arena, your product has to hit that price point that you can sell it at against every other bet online. And so when you're selling it in a store, you got to sell it at that same price. You can't sell it for more and hit a higher gross margin that way. So that's a lot of times where the gross margin pressure comes from with these products is like, hey, like this is our price competitive product, like particularly at the entry levels of these brands. This is our kind of, fill in the blank original, Casper original, Nectar original. This is our flagship. This is the one that we advertise a lot and get people into our funnel with. And it's got to be price competitive. We can't just have this be a $2,500 product because we won't get the clicks to our website. And then you have to have that price parity between what you're doing online and what's happening in the store. And that puts the gross margin pressure down.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think what originally put the pressure on the gross margin was how intentional were they from the beginning. I think when you have a bed, call it $1,000 online, when you take that exact same bed and you try to give a retailer a gross margin on top of what you're doing, right? Then it's very difficult to get them to a healthy gross margin. And if you remember back in the early days, I think it's changed now, but they had a really hard time being competitive. Like their $1,000 bed, I mean, you could have a legacy brand in there at $1,000 that would kick their butt because the cost structure on the e-com side. And, I don't know, what is your opinion, Mike, now in terms of cost structure from brick and mortar to e-com? Do you think they're fairly similar at parity? Like, in terms of how much it costs to run the e-com side of a direct-to-consumer business versus a brick and mortar? Do you think one is advantaged? What does your experience tell you?
One of the interesting things we've seen in the last 5 years in particular is relative to, say, the first 5 years of this D2C revolution, if you want to call it that, is that in those early days, nobody in these D2C brands, almost nobody, made their own beds. Now, when you look at the biggest D2C brands, a ton of them make their own beds. I mean, Casper's owned by Carpenter, making their own beds. Purple, actually, I think has always made their own beds. I'm not sure, but they certainly do now and have for a while. Nectar's owned by Ashley, making their own beds. Saatva and BIA merged, so effectively they're now making their own beds. A bunch of brands are owned by 3Z. They make their own beds. So all these brands are making their own beds, so they've ultimately gotten themselves to a greater parity with the incumbent brands in terms of that element of their cost structure. So then the rest of it is just how much do you spend on marketing and what is the mix between your direct sales where you have higher margin and your wholesale channel where you have lower margin. But otherwise, you're at parity with a fundamental core, or not necessarily parity. There's still scale advantages to the largest manufacturers, obviously, but you're much closer than you were when you were doing it with a contract manufacturer.
That's interesting you took us through that. Like, you're right, though. They're making their own stuff. I think Purple's even being made some by Sherwood, if I'm not mistaken. But yeah, they're partially, but it's same thing, right? I mean, that Sumner Group has an interest in that anyway. But yeah, I think that's a really good observation. I hadn't really thought of it. I mean, I guess I knew it one off, one by one, but You're right.
Yeah.
And that changes a lot.
It's pretty much across the board at this point.
Yeah, absolutely. So then what's the future look like here, right? I mean, if you're a upstart, I think anyone in the category these days, you got Somna Group, so strong, great contracts out there with a lot of retailers, so that makes it hard. They're expanding their interests with Kingsdown and Purple and other things. And then you got Helix and 3Z's doing what they're doing. And then you got the legacy brands with SSB trying to claw their way in and maintain, what they've got with the strategies they're putting in place. I don't think that the Tuft Needle acquisition worked out great for them. So I think there's an interesting story in that. But the future state, if you're a brand, isn't the roadmap clear? Like if you're going to come into the industry, like start D2C and then build it and grow it and fund your brand growth and awareness, try to find some unique selling proposition inside of a product, and then worry about brick and mortar. It's certainly not brick and mortar first.
I certainly would. Yeah, because you're going to iterate so much quicker to what that magical message is, what's going to resonate. You're going to find it so much faster with direct selling. And then you'll be able to exploit it with your retail partners further with the demand that you're generating. That is the blueprint at this point, I think, for sure. So as far as where this goes, I mean, we talked about some of the aspects of what I'm calling this new bargain, but you touched on RSA incentives with these lower margin products. And I think that gets to this one element of the new bargain that we haven't quite unpacked, which is when these products were first brought onto the sales floor, they were lower margin, they were lower price. And so nobody really wanted to sell them per se. They wanted to have them, but what they would do is put them in the back, way back. If there was a possible other room, they would try to put them there,
It's down the street. We've got them.
Yeah,
they're down the street.
It's actually, you got to leave the building, take a left, then there's a dark alley, and it's back right in there.
And they're next to the bathroom, right next to the bathroom.
They're actually in the bathroom.
Just move the bleach and the cleaning supplies off of the bed, and you can feel free to try that out.
Yeah, but while you're here, check out some of our other merchandise. I think you'll like it a little better. So they were trying to essentially get the traffic, but then immediately just upsell them on something else that was higher price, higher margin. And that was the game. And so obviously that didn't sit well with the D2C brands. They're like, hey, this is not a good bargain for us. But at the same point, the D2C brands were, hungry for distribution, and they were just trying to we know we're effectively losing these customers anyways because they're not going to transact online. So we have a better chance of converting them from your bathroom than we do from not having them anywhere in your market. So we'll take it. But eventually, as we talked about, they were bringing in expertise. I mean, Casper has brought in a ton of people who really know this industry, for example. And so they're bringing in those people who are telling them how to make these products successful on retail. How do you create a step-up story? How do you create a product assortment that works on a retail floor? All these things. And so they were doing all of that at the same time. And then as they were bringing those things to market, their expectations are going up, saying, hey, we're now expecting you to actually sell our products. And of course, as they have multiple retailers in a market, they have a little bit more leverage in that conversation as well. So the expectations of the D2C brands go up over time. And then it starts to reach a point at this market. What I found really interesting was I'm hearing the opposite now. I'm hearing the retailers complaining that some of their D2C brand partners are still marketing to those customers while they are in the store. So now the customer comes in the store and they're looking at this product, this D2C brand that they came in to look at. But then while they're lying on the bed, they check Facebook or Instagram or whatever, and they see this ad for a special extra discount on that product. And wow, wouldn't you want to buy this on our website with this extra, that kind of thing. So obviously the retailers are not happy about that. And so it really leads to this question, because you used the phrase earlier, which I thought was interesting because it was a phrase I had in my mind. You used the phrase owning the customer. And you said that the D2C brands, they own the customer. And I think that ultimately is where this debate currently lies. That's where this bargain is currently in its gray area, because it's really a question of who owns that customer and at what point does that change? Obviously, once the customer makes the purchase from the store, like they will take care of, I presume, the customer service, obviously the delivery and so forth. Well, unless it's drop ship, that's a bit of a gray area still. But in most cases, that is that retailer's customer. And the question, I guess, is when they're on the sales floor, they've come into the showroom, whose customer are they at that particular point in time? And I think that's, where there's probably debate happening between the D2C brands and the retailers.
That's a messed up scenario if you think about it. It's like, so you pay a matchmaking service to connect you to someone. You end up marrying that someone, but yet the matchmaking service continues to market to your future wife that they have better options for them at the time. Does that example work? That's what it feels like.
Or like while you're down on one knee, she's seeing an ad.
Yeah, matched up. I got more matches.
Like, this guy looks a little bit more handsome. Just give me 1 second. I know you're about to say something important, but give me one. I just want to swipe right here for a second.
And on the screen it says it's not too late. This guy's like, his net worth is higher, and
yeah, he's a little taller.
Yeah, he's a little taller. No, who owns a customer? That's it's a great point. But
and at what point does that change? At what point does the ownership of that customer transition? And I think the retailers have a solid argument that once they're in our showroom, hands off. This is our territory.
Yeah, that's never going to happen though, man, with all the geolocation stuff you could do. And those guys aren't, and it's hard to toggle that stuff on and off anyway, but make no mistake, those direct to consumer brands are probably geofencing like, different retailers out there. And that's pretty contrived, right? That's a business practice. I think you have to decide if someone's going to do that to you, how good of a partner they are. But make no mistake, brick and mortar retailers, that the direct-to-consumer brands benefit greatly by having a showroom with their product in it, your showroom, with their product in it, because it levels up their business online.
No question.
So I think that's definitely part of the benefit back to the direct-to-consumer brand for sure. And so, gosh, I mean, I think you could make the case, Mike, that, hey, man, lay off. Like when they're in my store, like how dare you? Like if they're out in the wild and whatever, that's fine. But don't fence off my store and market to them. That's not right.
Right.
Is that naive?
I agree. That's naive.
No.
Well, you made the case that it was naive, and then you came around to, I think, what I was saying, which is that I think it's a very strong argument that the retailers have that, like, once they walk in the door of my store, they've now transitioned to my auspices and hands off. Like, let me convert this customer. But again, their success winning that argument will depend, because the smart D2C retailers do track how many people they send into the store. They're able to see, at least get a broad sense of, because of this geofencing data, how many people did we send to your store? And they'll obviously know how many people ended up walking out of that store with one of their products. So if you're successful, if you're converting a lot of those, if they feel like when they come into the store looking for one of my products, they walk out in more cases than not with one of my products, then I think they're going to be hands off with that customer. But if they feel like we're sending a bunch of people in this store and they're walking out empty-handed, or at least as far as we see, they're buying something else, well, then that's when I think they're going to be shooting those marketing messages over Instagram or whatever.
And it'll be interesting, because how many of the brick and mortar retailers out there are sophisticated enough to engage in that conversation, to understand how they might be able to track that, right? Because that's a whole nother, talk about a new bargain. That's a whole nother layer to that. And then, Mike, let's talk about too, what is the cost structure for a brick and mortar retailer when you're bidding against your direct to consumer brands? Like, I remember being at Mat Firm, and before TSI owned Mattress Firm, right before, the conversations of, hey man, you guys back off. Like, we keep running into you on these keywords or whatever they are. And what ends up happening is the direct-to-consumer brand just drives the price of the marketing initiative up, because you're both bidding on the same customer, and your cost of acquisition just starts to skyrocket. So there's that part of this too.
That's true. That is another part of the bargain. So it's funny. I think the main purpose of this episode was, and hopefully in some cases we even put this on people's radar to even be thinking about some of these issues, whether they're from the D2C side or the retail side, that I think are on the forefront of where this conversation is happening. But the main point I think we're raising here is that we're not anymore talking about like whether there's benefit to selling direct. That's clear. Like we're well beyond that. And now we're down to these nuances of how do you strike that bargain in a way that really benefits both parties to maximum effect.
Well, and I think hopefully, Mike, this episode somehow sheds light on what we've been talking about in terms of like a brick and mortar retailer. How should you be looking at that? And where is it a good partnership? Where is it uncomfortable? Where does it end up being detrimental to your business? And then I think there's some stuff in here about messaging, like what's the job of the brand versus what's the job of the retailer? Is the brand's job to build value in product and the brick and mortar guy is supposed to just swing door? I would argue that the D2C guy is doing both. And so ad costs, I think the implication of that, the implication on the RSA, there's so many, my gosh, think about how much more convoluted this category is now than even 5 years ago. It's kind of crazy.
One day I will write the business school case study on this. It's been a fascinating thing to watch and be part of.
For sure. The evolution. Well, and you know what? We're not done. If you had to guess before we go, we'll take a shot at this. What the hell? What's next? Like where does this evolve? Like what's the next phase of kind of where we are? Any thoughts there?
Well, I think that we will continue on the path. I don't see, other than what we talked about last week, which I think is the massive disruptive force that affects, frankly, everybody we've talked about in today's conversation negatively. Like all parties that have been covered in today's conversation are negatively affected by what we talked about last week. But apart from that, on this particular front, I don't see a major disruptive force. What I see is a continued evolution in this direction. And it's not to say that you won't continue to see some brands not sell direct. I think it is a differentiator. And obviously, with some types of products, ultra luxury as being a good example, they just don't really lend themselves necessarily as well to selling direct and fulfilling it, and all the experience is just not replicable. But so not all products lend themselves to that. And there is space for differentiating yourself by not doing that. But I think in general, you're going to see more and more emphasis on direct selling because of the fact that it ultimately enables more brand building, more advertising, more product awareness, ultimately more consumer demand coming into retail.
So I think you're right. And I guess I would summarize by saying I think it's all about leverage. And leverage in this space is traffic to the store. It's something that retailers desperately want, brick and mortar guys. And it's pre-sold customers, so they have an opinion about your product prior to coming in. I think another thing to watch is people that aren't legacy brands, Sardis Simmons, as an example, man, those guys got to be at the table, man. They got to be driving their brand. They have to make it compelling. They have to make it interesting because they could get overtaken by some of these direct-to-consumer brands who are doing that. Mm-hmm. And I think you're right, too. Like, if you're going to really blaze a trail, Mike, and break in, the good news is I think it's going to require some innovation. Right? Just a typical bed. Helix came in, they crushed it. They had the whole customization. I think they're backing off of that now, which is fine, but it was kind of how they entered the market. Mm-hmm. So some innovation there is probably really good. So yeah, I think there's a lot coming, and really a lot that can be good, to advertising in the market. What I'd hope to see is people continue to build value in it, Mike, to deal with the stuff from last week's show, which is the commoditization of the category. We're lucky in that people are spending money on this category, and to continue to make it about better sleep and better health and better life. And, testing and the third-party validation, not with a review, but with a product validation, that kind of thing. I think that, hopefully we'll see some of that trend evolving and people leaning into those things more.
Yeah. It's going to be needed.
It is going to be needed. What did we forget? Anything? Oh, yeah, there was one other thing that we didn't talk about is where does it stop? How high up does it go? right? I mean, I
Oh.
think that the price points keep creeping up and up and up and up and up. And so first it was like, whatever, $350, $400. Now, people are fine with it being in a box. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there.
We have data on obviously what consumers tell us when they're looking for a mattress. Do they want to try their mattress before they buy it in a store? And how much are they planning to spend? What we saw originally was the people who said, no, I don't need to try my bed in a store first, had lower budget expectations than the people who said, yes, I need to try it. Guess what?
Mm-hmm.
Those are parity now.
Right. Right. So interesting. Well, everybody, I hope you have enjoyed this conversation. We'd love to hear your thoughts. We are confident that listening to all of this, you probably have had a couple of things pop into your head. Please share them with us. We'll be on LinkedIn and in other places. So make sure you let us know what's going on with your thinking and how you think it's going to evolve, current state, future state. We'd love to hear from you. But you've been listening to Mark and Mike with the Wake Up Call podcast. So grateful you are here. Please tell a friend, like, subscribe, do all those good things because we need you at the table.
We're out.